product of natural evolution, you would see an equal number of mutations throughout the entire virus. Oh, it makes it almost conclusive that all the mutations are just on that. He's the one that invented that technology. He's the one that discovered how you could engineer, take the spike protein, either create it from scratch or take it off an existing infectious virus and put it into a non-infectious virus. He then taught that to Xi Zhengli, the bat lady from Wuhan, and her boss, Lin Wang. And they were doing it back and forth since 2013, and they were describing it very openly. So not only that, but Barrick taught her something even more sinister, because there's no conceivable good purpose to it, which is a technique called seamless ligation, which is a way of then hiding the human engineering of that virus. Now, there's no reason to do that unless you want to create mischief. I mean, it's the inverse of what you'd want to do if you were actually interested in public health. You'd want to put red flags all over the human insertions. But here they were weaponizing a virus, and then they were figuring out what they had devised a way to hide the tampering that had weaponized it.
There's another thing that really, I know you know, but, and again, it was one of the things I did not know and should have known, and that is that part of Fauci's responsibility is biodefense. So after 9/11, DOD, Defense Department, moved in its biodefense, whatever that entails, whatever bioweaponry or whatever else it entails, but the biodefense into NIAID. So a lot of this work is around the biodefense, highly classified environment. And of course, that means that the transparency, the understanding of what is going on here is so much less indeed than it might otherwise have been. And I was rather shocked, because I went back, again, I was very friendly with Fauci. More than 20 years ago, I headed a commission for the World Health Organization in 2000, 2001, pressing to get antiretroviral drugs to poor Africans who were dying of HIV/AIDS. And Fauci was very helpful on that, and I helped to conceive of the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, TB, and Malaria, and I worked with him on that. And so we had a friendly relationship. I had no idea that biodefense was under his authority until I started to hear all these doubts, and I said to a scientist, I don't get it. Why would Fauci be so insistent on whatever the particular issue was? Is it because of his determination to make a vaccine? He said, Jeff, it's because of his biodefense portfolio. And so there's a part of this that we, are having a very hard time hearing about and knowing about. It's notable that Barrick wrote about even the potential biowarfare with SARS-CoVs already back more than 15 years ago. So when the first SARS came out, Barrick wrote a paper soon afterwards about bioweaponry and biowarfare. He said one of the viruses that could be useful for this would be SARS-CoV. Well, is that what's going on? Is that the agenda? I don't know. I'm not making those claims, but what I am saying is that we're not seeing the story, and NIH is not telling us the story. And the extent of that research, which you're right, goes back all the way to SARS-1, because it wasn't so soon after the first SARS outbreak that a very clever scientist put in the FCS into SARS-CoV-1 and said, whoa, that increased the effectiveness a lot. And then in 2009, they did it again. And then Barrick, as you say, created this so-called reverse genetic system, which made it possible to manipulate these viruses. And as you say, the seamless ligation, he calls it the no-seum method. It's the artist that doesn't sign his name to the painting. The virologist that doesn't put his signature into the virus to let us know whether or not it is produced naturally or emerging naturally, or whether it is produced in a laboratory. All of it says, my God, there was really a big, very risky research agenda underway. And what's amazing to me, again, I'm sorry to say it because amazing sounds so naive in this context, but that's how I came to it. I found it amazing each step. If you look at the Decimal Origins paper, which was the first published narrative, published in March 2020 in Nature Medicine, it set the narrative that this is natural. It's ludicrous because when it comes to the question, could this have come out of a lab? It's almost unbelievable what is said. It says, no, it was not out of a lab because the virus we see was not previously reported. And then there's a footnote number 20, which people can look up because all of this can be found online. And footnote 20, Bobby said, is to a 2014 article, 2014, that they're using to disprove a lab outbreak in late 2019. And that got published and was, by what I've heard, the most cited biomedical article of the year 2020. And frankly, it's garbage. Because on the crucial question, a real scientist would say, gee, we don't know what's going on here. Could it have been from a lab? Yeah, it's absolutely possible. Here's how it would have done. But I, the author, or we, the group of authors, don't know because we're not privy to the information of what was actually going on in the labs. That would have been a scientific statement. But instead, there is a narrative, a willful misdirection, because no serious scientist could say, nope, it's not out of a lab because I cite a 2014 paper. It's almost a joke. Maybe it was a joke to them. Let's see what we can get away with. But they made a narrative out of whole cloth or whole viruses or something to tell us don't look in that direction. And when you go to look back at that article, it's absurd, even on its face. You don't have to be a virologist to look and say, that's ridiculous. And then there's a next article in 2021 in Cell, which is another very esteemed journal. It's another game because in 2021, even after the revelations of these dangerous experiments, this one says, well, this virus is not like the 3 or so reported viruses that were under research at WIV. And then they have the audacity to say in that Cell article in 2021, and it would be illogical to use an untested virus. They actually say that as if grown-ups are going to read this and say, oh, well, that puts any concern to rest. And what's funny about, it's not funny. All of this is deadly serious. Almost 18 million people dead from this pandemic, according to solid estimates. What's amazing about this is that we know that they should have been curious about all of this and never showed one moment of curiosity. And the specific point, I lost my train of thought for a moment, was that Barrick actually said, he explained the opposite of what was claimed in Cell, where the Cell article said, why would you use something new? And Barrick, in a fascinating interview, by the way, in 2015, explains, oh, if you want a really powerful vaccine or drug, you need something that's really broad-based. So you have to hit it with every virus you can find. He explains precisely the opposite of what is said in Cell as supposedly the reason why it's not a lab release. Barrick says, no, I want to have every virus that I can get my hands on to test my drugs and my vaccines against, because we know that nature is going to mix up all of this stuff. So we have to get something that is quite general in its efficacy, not specific to one particular strain. So Barrick was especially interested in that whole library approach. Let's look at a whole big range of viruses. He was also absolutely keen on the furin cleavage site because, that's what makes this really dangerous. So stick it in there, and then we'll see whether my drug works or my vaccine works, because he's trying to make antidotes or biodefense or whatever it is that he's actually trying to do. So he wants the FCS, the furin cleavage site, in there to be able to see whether his drugs work. And there's another fascinating editorial by Barrick, I think in 2017 or 2018, written as an editorial in a biomedical journal. And Bobby, in that editorial by Barrick, he says, why are they doing all of this? Why are they doing all of this control over our research? UNC invested a lot of money in my BSL-3 facility and all this red tape. Don't they understand how essential this work is for drug development? And then he touts the fact that he's working with Gilead on remdesivir. And he says, so we need to know, we need to test it. We need to do all these experiments because of all of this. So there's a lot of fascinating stuff to learn that we have not even begun to have a serious look at in this country, because we've been told very simply, look the other way. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and one of the things you didn't mention was that Barrick also developed a humanized mouse that he bred to have the ACE2 receptors in their lungs to test not only whether you could give them the disease, but then induce them to cough and sneeze and pass it through respiratory vectors to other animals in the colony. And he took those mice and he shared them with Xing Li so that she had her own colony to do these terrible experiments on, which, of course, there's no evidence that any of these experiments have ever done anything to develop a vaccine or avoid the pandemic. I want to just fill in some of the history, which I'm sure you know about, so our listeners will know. We had a huge bioweapons program in this country until 1969. And Richard Nixon did something extraordinary, which he needs to get a lot of historical credit for, which is he stood up and said, we're getting rid of all of our biological weapons. He didn't believe in them, and he thought they actually put us at a disadvantage because America had nuclear weapons and biological weapons could be made so cheaply, and they had nuclear efficacy. So they were kind of a poor man's nuke. And so he wanted to end the program, and they got rid of the stocks, except the CIA secretly retained stocks and continued to illegally do these. But so we signed the bioweapons treaty at that point. Then we had the anthrax attacks in 2001, 1 week after 9/11. And the anthrax, as it turns out, came from Fort Detrick, which was a CIA, military facility.
You can't make this stuff up, as they say.
The two people it was sent to were the two guys who were blocking the Patriot Act, which is Tom Daschle and Patrick Leahy. He shut down government, blamed it on Saddam. We went to war against Iraq, and we reopened our secretly. One of the things that people don't understand is when they passed the Patriot Act, which they did directly because of the anthrax attacks, in the Patriot Act, buried in those 1,300 pages, is a provision that essentially repudiates the bioweapons treaty. So that it says, it doesn't actually say weapons development. And
exactly. It became the biggest part of NIH. Just the giant there.
At the same time, the military gave him a 68% raise. So he became the highest paid person in the federal government. His annual salary is $437,000, and the president of the United States gets $400,000. Oh, but his continuation of that salary is dependent on him doing this weapons development, and that's part of that's all part of the mix.
Bobby, one of the things that's come out is one of the people that was